Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Rejuvi 45. If you are here because you've heard this phrase and concept of modern leadership, which is the idea that you can be and we can build and grow compassionate human leaders at the same time as we build fierce business leaders. So thank you for being here. This is the community all about that. My name is Regina Hebb, and today I am joined by.
Video them ready. Nice to meet you all.
And Charlie Jacoby.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. It's been a while since the three of us have been together.
Yeah,
It sure has. Yep.
I feel like the last time we were together, we were in the session called To Bespeak with the great bespoke custom suit. I feel like that was one of the last times we were together. So it's been a while, it's been a year, but it's so good. It's so good to have you here. And today we are going to our topic today, the fun phrase is called right to expect. And the subtitle in this is about describing our point of view about the leadership development space and value. So in the past, we've always approached this topic. Well, first of all, we believe people have a right to expect value, right? People should expect value. Customers should expect value. Businesses should expect value, right? It's not a hard concept. And I think that as we've come into this particular topic, we've approached it from the idea of people, consumers should expect value from leadership development. And in the past, we've kind of we've accepted that you can't measure the soft stuff, right? Has been what's been accepted. And the whole idea is that, nope, you know what has been intuitive in the past can now be empirical, and you can actually measure the return of leadership development. So that's been kind of that's been the way we've tackled this value subject in the past. But today we're going to approach it a little bit differently. And that's why we have someone, Vid, who is an expert at analytics and transformation, and Charlie, who is an expert at tech and transformation. And we're going to talk about value realization from both of your perspectives, right? So just tell me from a high level perspective, did I get that right? You guys with me?
Yep.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right, so I've got a couple of questions for the two of you. And I think that as we just, whoever wants to go first, go first. I know I've seen you two work together. You, interrupt each other in a really nice way a lot. And number two, you build upon each other a lot. So I'm going to put these questions in front of you, and then let's kind of see where we go. So, the first thing I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about is the critical role that modern leadership, and again, this idea of human-centered leadership, really healthy change management. What's the critical role that these things play in the adoption and value realization of emerging analytics and tech capabilities? How do you see that?
All right, Ved, you want me to lead
Yeah,
off?
go ahead. Go ahead.
All
Yep. Go
right.
ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so Reg, I loved your intro about right to expect. And as a leader myself who has worked in transformation programs for a long time now, I think the teams that are part of those transformations, which are often work that involves new things to an organization, very challenging scopes that need to be delivered against, right? I think everybody that's a part of those teams has a right to expect from their leaders a form of leadership that allows everyone on the team to, at the end of the day, be able to deliver value. So to be able to deliver value, on those interim milestones that are always part of big programs, but also in the end to be able to deliver value. And, oftentimes there are big commitments made to organizations because organizations are making a big investment in transformations, as an example. And so it's critical, and the teams are right to expect their leaders to help them navigate and be able to deliver on that value. And I think from a modern leadership perspective, I think that in today's age of rapidly advancing and expanding technology capabilities, the power of compute that everybody that works in an organization has at their disposal. It's imperative to really be able to set the intent of, a transformation program, or what the goals and objectives are, like the intent of, why are we together as a team and why are we doing this? And then ultimately to make sure that with the team understanding that, then really thinking about, like, okay, how are we structuring the work? How are we taking into account new capabilities that are coming in, the skill sets that are needed to implement and deploy those capabilities, and then ultimately working together as a team to help set our milestones, keeping in mind that there may be outside forces that are driving certain timelines, but really being able to ensure that we're bringing everybody together so that they can bring their best day in and day out on what they're working on, because I think people have a right to expect that as well. And, they don't want to be involved in in just something that's completely unreasonable and come in every day completely stressed out that they're not going to meet objectives and be able to ultimately deliver on the value. So that really coming together and saying, all right, how do we set our goals and objectives, and how can everybody bring their best? So I think about modern leadership as that, because we're empowering people to work together and set those things versus, more of maybe a command and control approach where somebody on top says, hey, we're going to deliver X by this date, and we expect this, right? And that's just it's a completely different way of doing things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think just the way that I think Charlie set it up, Reg, I kind of, love the question. And I think the question, if I'm hearing you correctly, is you're saying, when it comes to leadership and when it comes to modern leadership, like what's the thing that we should be paying attention to? And I 100% agree with the fact that, when you think of the technology landscape and how rapidly it's evolving, even in we'll call it the age of AI, right? In the age of AI, I think I don't know if it's necessarily new leadership skills or if it's a reinforcement of the existing need for what great and excellent leadership is, right? So if you think about great and excellent leadership, I feel it really, I think, sits on a few key things. So the first thing I think is this whole notion around significant shifts in mindsets and what would be skill sets, right? I think focusing in on that, like that's, I think, the role of leadership now, as it's probably even more important now than it's probably been at any time in our history, as guiding and leading teams. But I feel that that's a key one, the mindset and skill set shifts. And within that, there's really a few things I feel that are super, super important that come to mind. One is change management, right? This notion about the before and after and how we transition through that and how we bring everybody along and how we influence and how we impact inside organizations. I think if there was ever a time for great emphasis on leadership, change management would be one of those key, one of those key things in my mind. The other one to me is this notion around, the human-centered approach to this change management. It's not, great. Yeah, I understand technology is rapidly evolving, but it's still a very human experience. These machines are not running themselves. I hope they don't do that for many, many years to come. But anyways, they're not running themselves. So the notion of how do you have the human in the loop mindsets, and how do you kind of teach and develop that, and connected to that is all talent management and development. I think these three for me would be key aspects of modern leadership. And I think they fit well even within the current landscape that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. I'm gonna, if I try to summarize what the two of you have said, I like how Charlie leads into this with because of big investments, right? Because of big expectations. And now I'm going to lead into how you started this, Vid, is when it comes to the fact that it is now the age of AI, There is the criticality of human-centered leadership, of modern leadership is paramount, right? It's absolutely paramount. And that I would build also on what you're talking about. You don't know, you posed a little bit of a question. You don't know if it's new leadership skills or reinforced leadership skills. I think it's actually a little bit of both, right? It's a little bit of both. And I think that we can look at, for example, past data and research that would tell us as organizations are making these large scale transformations and making these big investments, in new ways of working in technology, and you go and take a look at, well, why is why are we falling short of what was intended?
Mm,
And the past research would tell us, there's a pretty standard list of things that help us to understand why it's falling short. There are things like the urgency for the shift from here to there hasn't really been made clear to people, or they don't feel it in kind of a, skin in the game kind of way. Or, for example, we know the number two reason why things are falling short is because there is not confidence, or there is not a sense of trust in the team that is actually guiding the transformation. So as we look to the past, there are, I think, some reinforced things that we can do, reinforcing leadership there. It's always about leadership, right? It's always about leadership that's going to help us to kind of say we need to make the most of this transformation. But I also think that there's some kind of new sorts of things, right? So for example, when you take a look at Rejuvi research and you take a look at strategic intent capability, and again, we're taking a look at, our question is how do you get the most? How do you realize the most value, right? How do you help people to get what they expect, from their analytics and their tech investments? So when we take a look at how we think about leadership and strategic intent, and you go into these practices that leaders have to execute against. One of them, which has been newer to the strategic landscape, is something that is all about giving people a chance to understand readiness,
mm,
right? So right. So it's called readiness factoring. It is a new leadership skill. We have taught our leaders in the past that it is, Charlie, you're going to love this, command and control, right? Reinforce the big picture, right? Define the summit that we have to head towards, right? And we define that for people, and then we expect them to execute against it, right? Long term to short term. Well, one of the new leadership skills that has now emerged is something that we call give the leader the ability to help his or her team have an honest conversation about how ready or how not ready are we to take on, that summit. And when you give people a chance, when you build this readiness capability, or readiness factoring capability inside of our leaders, it's a whole new skill set that they haven't had before, because they're actually working with their teams, and they're actually now skilled in the ability to say, folks, this is what we're being asked to do. And before we go and do it, let's stop for a moment and talk about, number one, what are all the things that are going to help us to achieve that? List, right? But number two, what are all of the things that are going to prevent us from achieving this?
mm,
And you put that list together. When you give leaders the skill of readiness factoring, and when you empower them to go to their teams to have this honest conversation about readiness, the stuff that's going to support us, and the stuff that's gonna prevent us from accomplishing it, you get a more relevant understanding of the landscape, about what it's really going to take to achieve this big picture, you know? So back to the question about when it comes or because of our big investments and our big expectations of our investments in analytics and technology, and when it comes to the fact that it is the age of AI, I believe that not only the leadership things of the past, but also new leadership things of the future are paramount for to us to realize value, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And I really like that. I really like that articulation of it's a bit of both.
Mhm.
It's a bit of reinforcing, but it's a bit of, it's almost, it's going to that whole, when I think of mindset, skill set, probably mindset is reinforcing a little bit of the past and skill set is reinforcing a little bit of the new kind of a thing. But yeah,
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 yeah, love it.
Yeah, and I think that readiness factoring, it's very relevant because I think right now, when you look at the investments that are being made in AI, generative AI, some version of AI, they're very significant, right? And we're getting now to that first inflection point where people are looking for, okay, what's the value? What's the business value we're seeing from that? And I think in the people that I've been talking to, one of the biggest, I'll say, panic areas is around adoption, right? And so really being able to understand the readiness of a part of the organization that is now able to utilize these new capabilities or whatever, what is their readiness for consuming that and adopting it and bringing it into the
yep,
business flow?
Mhm.
yep,
And I think, it's inherent on leaders who are, both creating and deploying as well as receiving into their organization these capabilities to really understand that and make
Mhm.
sure, the teams that are delivering are doing their own readiness factoring to make sure they have the right skills and everything and preparedness to deliver successfully. But then also, for those leaders whose teams are receiving the output that they're ready to adopt, utilize, and make sure the organizations get the value out of where the investments have been made. So
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah,
I love the
yeah. We're gonna move into the kind of the framework question, like new frameworks for this valuation in a minute. But I want to, you guys have just kind of caught my attention. I want to take a little bit of a detour. So it is December 12th, 2024. I'm saying that out loud because we record a lot at Rejuvi. But this has been a tough 2 weeks for people, right? This has been a tough 2 weeks for the business landscape with some of the challenges that have happened, especially in the healthcare, the industry, and some actually tragic things that have happened. And, one of the things that I just want to say out loud is that when we talk about value realization of our tech investments, that people have a right to expect that, and how important it is to approach this not only from um, a growth mindset and reinforcing this leadership skills that we know are required, but also working hard to take on new ones. I just think it's the whole idea of something like readiness factoring and giving everybody a chance to talk about their own sense of helps and hinders to any single goal is really important because I think it gives every human involved in a movement a voice. And I think what's happening is if a leader doesn't know how to complete readiness factoring or doesn't have that as a part of their tool set, voices are going to go unheard. And when voices go unheard, it creates problems, at the project level,
oh yeah,
at the team level, at the business level, and now we're seeing it at a community level. Do you guys know what I mean? It's just kind of
yeah,
snowballed because we don't give people a voice through a new skill called readiness factoring.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that probably what you're hitting on is something that is so fundamental, I think, to driving success and growth and value inside organizations or even outside organizations, right? This is
Yes.
probably a human, this is more of a human truth as opposed to an organizational truth, if you may. And it goes to the point that we were talking about earlier, is that to me, I think that readiness factoring is a key component of that has to be understanding what the human experience is as these changes happen. Do you know what I mean? Oftentimes, I think so much focus is placed on the tool and the ways of working or the process, if you may, that somehow, which is ironical, but the humans get to be left out. And I think that's probably what you're hinting at is the notion of voices being heard, and how do you do that in a way
Yeah.
that's both inclusive, but at the same time, allows us to move forward, right?
Mhm.
Without feeling like we're paralyzed all the time. So yeah, I think that's a skill. The other piece that occurs to me also, Reg, is this notion around critical thinking, right?
Mhm.
The idea of learning a formula and then having the smarts to generalize it. It's not just
Mhm.
about applying the formula, it's about generalizing it to multiple variables given to you. If I had to bring that analogy to leadership, I think that's a critical piece as well. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, how do you derive value under challenging circumstances? There is no roadmap. In fact, that's the definition of being a leader, is you're
Mhm.
not given a roadmap.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? You're navigating it. You're kind of figuring
Well,
it out. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's
I
another
see
aspect.
exact, I
Yeah.
see, I see exact, and Charlie, I think I just interrupted you, but I see exactly what you're saying. And I think that what you have just actually put in front of everyone is some of the thinking about new frameworks
Mhm.
that are absolutely required for value realization. And let me just kind of say what I heard you say in relationship to the framework, and then get you gentlemen talking about the frameworks that you see actually moving us forward. But we can talk about, for example, a new leadership practice called readiness factoring that must be used in order to create this new flow of leadership that will help. But if you take a look at how is that practice called leadership or called readiness factoring actually related to the human, right? To the leader. You're exactly correct, Vid. There's a point of intersection to their critical thinking capability. So for example, if you take a look at the Rejuvi model, right? And I don't know how well this is going to work, but if you take, I think I have to put it, no, I put it by my face. If you take a look at the Rejuvi model, you would say, okay, there is this readiness factoring that takes place down here, right? It is in the southeast corner, but it intersects, sorry, I just put it on my nose. It intersects with this capability, kind of the IQ, the ideation quotient, the C capability of the leader. And part of that is their critical thinking. But it's a new framework, right? It's a new framework for how to help organizations move very differently because everybody wants a right to expect value, people, teams, leaders, businesses, consumers.
Yeah, and I think so. Everyone has a right to expect value, and we need to make sure to define the value that is to be received or expected at the right level of detail and as inclusive as possible, right? And this gets to, I think, the other power of the other power of readiness factoring, allowing everybody to speak up, is going to make sure, I think, or is going to help ensure that the stakeholders who are seeing value out of or who need to see value out of whatever you're leading are represented, right? Because too often, I think there's not adequate representation of all the stakeholders who need to see value out of work
Yeah.
that's being done. And so I think allowing, using readiness factor to allow everyone to have a voice at the table will also ensure that, like from a bottom up perspective almost, we're
Mhm.
defining those critical stakeholders.
Mhm. Let's talk about, ways to engage all the critical stakeholders and kind of transition from, I mean, we're all in agreement, right? Modern leadership, human-centered leadership blended with fierce business leadership that represents a critical role inside of tech value, analytics and tech valuation. But how do you guys think about a framework for moving forward? If you were talking to, someone new to your organization, if you were, I know you two do a lot of mentoring, but you do a lot of public speaking. How do you guys start talking about new frameworks for leaders, teams, businesses to move forward so that all stakeholders are engaged, right? So that real value can be derived. How do you think about those frameworks?
Yeah, I can. Do you want me to go first, Charlie, or do you want to
Yeah,
respond?
go ahead.
So I think to me, I would start from kind of the top. The whole notion of a framework is to give us an organizing construct. So you can get a whole bunch of folks understanding exactly what is being communicated. So it's almost like a what I call a primer, right? A framework is a primer for understanding what needs to be done and then how to bucket it in like really neat little, neat little chunks, if I could use that term. And then more importantly, what entails within those chunks, and then how do you know you're moving in the right direction? So if we said framework, that's what comes to mind to me. That's the way I'd start unpacking it. And I feel that in this age of speed of value, right? We really are, I think, at an unprecedented technology, I would say cusp, and we've already probably crossed it, but we're experiencing such low latency between when an idea is produced and when it makes money. If I had to, if you took the past 100 years of business innovation, I think that latency between idea to market was probably 10x what it is today. It probably even 1000x what it is today. Do you know what I mean? What I mean is that what was probably 100 days, a few years ago is now pretty much hours in that sense. So the question then becomes is how do you make decisions that are pacing, right?
Yeah.
And then how do you, more importantly, make sure you make the right decisions? Because guess what? You can make decisions. The question is, are they the right ones or the wrong ones? So you want everybody to be making the right decisions. So frameworks become even more critical
Mhm.
to align upfront. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And
Mhm.
I feel that the easiest way to unpack that would be to say from idea to execution,
Mhm.
you know, what are the key elements that really need to land when it comes, in the purview of leadership and leader accountabilities inside organizations.
Mhm.
It's not just simply
Mhm.
saying we have a great idea, go make it happen.
Mhm.
It's like we have a great idea, and by the way, here's some critical pathways to making sure that we're putting the discipline and the rigor, you know, at pace, but do it continuously. So that's kind of my sense, Reg, as I think about it.
I love it. I want to respond to your constructs piece, but not until Charlie kind of gives his viewpoint on
Sure.
frameworks. Charlie, how do you think about frameworks?
Yeah, because I've worked in the technology space for so long, I've had a lot of experience working with different methodologies, right? And methodologies I view as they're essentially frameworks, right? And I think one of the downsides of methodologies can be people view it too much as a recipe that they follow step by step. And really it needs to be methodologies need to be looked at, in my opinion, as guardrails. There's a value in consistency and a common way of doing things, but you also need to allow for human ingenuity, right, as a part of that. And so having a methodology that provides those guardrails can be really powerful. It also allows people to bring their best because they kind of know the things that they need to do within a construct or a framework, right? And so when I think about leadership, I think about it the same way. I mean, it's relatively easy to say, hey, we really want to focus on human-centered leadership that also drives fierce business results. It's another thing to have a framework that allows you to put that in place, right? And a framework would be that same thing. Like, here's some ideas and guardrails on ideas of, how you could do this, questions you can ask yourself and your team, to move this forward. And so that's how I think about frameworks.
Mhm. I've heard you talk about this idea of methodologies are good, but they can be, in some case, they can limit, right? They can put fence posts around people, and um, it can hurt human ingenuity. So I love that perspective. I also think that, when you think about that, the new frameworks that you move forward then have to be not only methodology based, right? How, what is the leader doing from a practice perspective, right? But what are the points of intersection? What are the synapses that start to connect to the actual human, right? And so I love that new frameworks that have emerged in what Rejuvi calls modern leadership actually bring what the business, what the constructs are for the business, the methodologies for the business in relationship to the synapses of the human, right? So I think it is so good that there are new frameworks that actually help us to understand some of the problems of one-dimensional methodologies of the past. And then before I get you guys last to talking about what happens when you apply these new frameworks, right? Um, I want to make this bridging comment. That when I think of frameworks, I think about how you responded first to talking about understanding a new construct. The first time I heard you talk about that was over oatmeal. We were having bowls of oatmeal together. And I didn't really know what you were talking about. And I thought that it was our kind of, different backgrounds and the way that we said words. Because when I think of the word construct, I think construct. I
Mhm.
think the verb, and I don't think the noun construct. But one of the things that you have taught me is about the value of a construct in a framework, because the construct makes the belief real, because it
Mhm.
transitions us from a qualitative understanding or belief in something to the ability to measure it
Mhm.
qualitatively,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And I think that that's what this word construct actually does. And it's deeply connected to what Charlie's talking about in terms of his understanding of what a framework means, right? If the framework is only methodology based, right, and isn't connected to the synapses of the human, it's going to be limiting, right?
Exactly.
But when you take constructs, the trellises that grow the business in relationship to the constructs, the trellises that grow the human, then you get there's magic happening, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
There's all the stakeholders are actually served in a really, really healthy way. So
Absolutely.
love this
Absolutely. Yeah.
conversation.
One last thing to say, kind of to state the obvious, we talked about frameworks, but I think to reinforce the reason I think frameworks become so critical within this conversation and in general, but definitely within this conversation is because I really think having a framework and successfully deploying it really does, in my mind, three things. It basically, creates a common language and understanding, right? Like I was saying before. But the important piece is it also creates this landscape for measurable outcomes. You can actually
Yes,
intend, hey, I want to do this. And then if I'm doing it, is it working or isn't it working? So think of that as measurable outcomes. And both those together means that we can have consistency. And we have consistency, we have scalability. And that's how you basically move organizations forward. You just don't do
yes,
it based
yeah.
on, based on spurts of insight. You do it based on taking that spurt of an insight and turning it into a operational, scalable, you know,
Mhm.
applicable thing. And I don't know how you would do it without a framework. So why would it be a surprise in the topic of leadership development? You know what I mean? It's like it's the exact same mindset that needs to be applied there too.
Well, you really have answered, I think, the next question, and I'll just kind of put it out there and also get Charlie's view on this is when you think about the application and learnings of the framework, right? How do you think about that in relationship to value? And what I hear you talking about, Vid, is number one, the framework gives you a common language. And when you take that common language and it's more dimensional, right? The constructs of the business, the
Yep.
constructs of the business, and you can break those down to attribute level sorts of things, you create measurable outcomes, right?
Correct. Yep.
And when you create those measurable outcomes, then that's when you start to create the traction, right? It's the traction. The traction sometimes may be forward based, right? Okay, we've got some consistency and we're moving forward. Sometimes it may be, reverse, right? Maybe it's not the outcome that you wanted, but at least it's understood and can inform future action, right? Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it was another great parallel to methodologies, right? So in Agile, we talk about requirements being gathered in user stories, and the reason why it's important to story point those user stories, which is essentially like a story point is an estimate of, how many points does this story have, which gauges complexity, right? Then as you're doing sprints, there, are standard reports that show story point velocity. And then that allows you to predict delivery, right? It's really the only way to have a good prediction of delivery because the team, and you can't do it after the first, you have to have a core set of sprints that show that velocity. And the more sprints you have that demonstrate the velocity, the more predictable you can be. So we wouldn't be able to measure that if every sub team or every developer was doing things differently, right? That they didn't care about story points. They didn't have a consistent way of putting them together. So I think that's a nice way to also illustrate that when you have frameworks, methods, whatever, it does a big part of it is it allows you to measure. And that's a great position to be in.
Mhm.
Measure and predict.
Yeah. Can you give us, and this is kind of either one of you or both of you, can you give us a practical example of what you've learned from an organization who has said, "Hey, we get it, right? We get it." Their modern leadership, human-centered, fierce business leadership plays a critical role in how we move forward. So we're going to use their frameworks because it's going to produce these measurable outcomes and start to inform the velocity, that and or an understanding of the velocity that we have or that we don't have. Can you guys give us just a practical example of what you're seeing organizations learning who have applied this?
But
Yeah,
you
I
want
can. Yeah, I can go. I can go. So one of the main differences we see is upfront, right? Is the whole approach and how this topic of leadership development is discussed within an organization. I would say that that's the first shift you see.
Yeah.
Organizations once they're taking this modern leadership framework thinking to the whole topic of how do I develop my leaders and how do I set them up for success means that the kinds of conversations they're having is very different. They're not having a intermittent, sporadic, episodic, discussion on the topic. What they're saying, what do we do to kind of raise the cohort or the leadership capacity capability of my cohort of leaders who are then accountable for driving long-term strategic outcomes for my organization. So there's this kind of a cohort mindset that sets in, and then this mindset around saying that development has to be accountable and responsible to raise the entire cohort to a certain level. So it's almost like the rising tide raises all boats
Yeah.
mindset. That's the first. I would say that that's the first difference that I see once
Mhm.
organizations take this to heart, take the modern leadership framework to heart and move forward.
Mhm.
The second one I think that we're seeing is that it's the ability now to measure specific point movements in those leaders' capabilities and capacities, and measuring them as they relate to whatever their desirable business outcomes are. They could say, hey, there's three kind of key performance indicators that are key to achieving our strategic goals for the organization. And then now you can go in and you can basically apply taking this framework and being able to measure it at those attribute level that you talked about, Reg. Organizations are beginning to leverage that insight to say, if I develop this specific aspect of my leader cohort capability capacity, here's how much that drives the key performance indicator for my business. So that ability to tie out that value down to the development effort is, I think, a first, but that's kind of the big shift
Yeah.
prior.
I'm looking at time too, and we just kind of want to summarize what you've just said, because when you start thinking about the real life use cases about organizations who've moved forward with this, I do agree that the first thing that they're learning from serving their right to expect value from their investments is that, number one, we have to respect the new flow of leadership work. And the new flow of leadership work is embedded in our ability to gain value from the investments that we choose to make. Number two, you have to take a look at the frameworks that are inherent, the dimensional frameworks that are now inherent in this new flow of leadership work, because they connect to both the business and they connect to the actual human. And number three, when you do that, you can actually move past an episodic discussion of value, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
even in the past, when you take a look at something like leadership development, it's always been episodic. We say, we're going to make an investment in this program, in this vendor, and we're going to try to understand what the return on investment on that thing actually was. You
Yep.
can push past that episodic understanding, right? And you can get to what you said, Vid, was this points-based understanding, this points-based movement in terms of, wait a minute, what actual difference did it make to the outcomes that our organization cares about?
Yep.
1% incremental improvement in this piece of the new framework.
Yep.
Oh, that's connected to this percentage increase in our market share.
Exactly. Yep.
This 1% incremental improvement in this piece of the new framework. Oh, that increases the adoption rate of our AI investments by this over here. That's
Yep.
exactly what we're saying. And those are real use cases. That's what we're really learning. And it does help organizations move from this episodic understanding and decisioning and directioning of what's going on to this points-based movement of like, oh, this is really what's going on inside of our organizations.
Mhm. Yep.
I couldn't think of two people better to come together today to talk about right to expect. People, leaders, teams, businesses, communities have a right to expect value. And because there are all stakeholders that we want to pay attention to in the value equation. But that right to expect value is going to require some differences as we make analytics and tech investments. And though that is really about recognizing that it's critical, and it requires a dimensional framework, and that dimensional framework is going to build a whole new world of measurement capability for us. So thank you too for being with Rejuvi 45 today. Like I said, I couldn't imagine anyone better to come and discuss this topic today. For those of you who are watching our full recording and watching our reels that we post on our social media sites, thank you. Continue to hang in there with your modern leadership movements. Continue to check in with us. We will be back next week for our last December session. It will be called To Bespeak, and that will be on Thursday, December 19th. Until then, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.